Welcome to Psychoanalysis and You, the podcast of the American Psychoanalytic Association. I'm your host, Dr. Gale Saltz. I'm a psychoanalyst and a psychiatrist. This is Psychoanalysis and You. Dr. Julie Nagel is a psychoanalyst who began her career as a pianist. She's a graduate of the Juilliard School and the University of Michigan with a master's in social work, psychology, and a PhD in psychology and social work as well. She's also a graduate of the Michigan Psychoanalytic Institute in adult psychoanalysis. Dr. Nagel has published in numerous psychoanalytic and music journals and has done interviews and podcasts that are available on her website, julienagel.net. She is the recipient of the Tycho Award and the Menninger Award from the American Psychoanalytic Institute. She is the author of 3 books, Melodies of the Mind, Career Choices in Music Beyond the Pandemic, and has a clinical practice in Dexter, Michigan, where she offers presentations and programs to analytic and lay audiences as well. This is such an interesting combination. Welcome.
Thank you.
So this is really about looking at applied analysis. You do psychoanalysis in your office, but you also apply psychoanalytic concepts to the field of music.
Right.
And you have this interesting background as you are truly a musician. So first start by telling me a little what led you to pursue music as a profession in the first place, and then how you moved from that to psychoanalytic training, and of course, ultimately to blending music and psychoanalysis.
You're covering the map here with me. It's really my life story.
Yes.
Being a musician, being a psychoanalyst, but being a musician is who you are. It's not what you do. It's not your job. It is something that comes from inside. And it develops over the course of a lifetime. For me, it did. And I know it does for many musicians because you start as a child. And I have an interesting story to tell you about my childhood, how I started. And I did not really understand what all of this meant. It's still on, everything is ongoing. But through my analysis and through my work in analysis and through my work with my patients and through my writing, I started to understand what was going on when I started playing the piano when I was 4 years old. My mother and my father had given me a little white, small 24-key piano. And I don't know how, but I picked out tunes and melodies. Nobody had taught me. I didn't know anything. I just was picking out tunes. And I loved that little piano. Not long after that, my father left the family. And to make a long story short, he never had anything to do with me again. My mother and I moved to Virginia, and I grew up with my grandparents and with my mother. And when I was 6 years old, I began piano lessons, formal piano lessons, because my mother could tell I loved my piano. And she bought me an upright piano to do my lessons. And I composed little melodies. And my piano teacher wanted to record several of these melodies and little songs that I had written. And we had a recording session, and in those days, we had a tape recorder, the reel-to-reel. And I was playing my music, and I forgot. I forgot my own music. I had my first memory slip. And I remember, as best I can remember back that time, but I do remember vividly, whispering, because I knew somehow it was going to be forever on these reels. You couldn't splice them and do things with them like you do now. And it was going to be forever and always, and you would hear my mistake. Whoever listened to these things would hear my mistake or my block. And I was whispering because I didn't want my voice on the tape. Stop the record, stop the record. And she didn't do that. She didn't hear me, or she didn't listen, or she didn't want to. I don't know, but she kept it going. Now, as a 6-year-old, I don't think I knew or would understand what the word shame or feeling humiliation or feeling embarrassed or feeling that somebody would see me as being inadequate. But I was thinking, this is my music. How can I forget what I wrote? And that has stayed with me, I think was as best I can remember, as early as I can remember, was my first memory slip and my first sense of something's wrong with me. And nobody listened to me and nobody cared. By this time, my father had been absent. And this comes to play later on as I got into my psychoanalysis and understand what it means to have a trauma, an early trauma, and to be
The first trauma, your father left.
my father left, and he stayed left. He stayed gone, and that somehow this was connected with me forgetting. But as we see in psychoanalytic treatment, things get displaced, turned around, upside down, and it turned into being forgotten, not listened to. The piano teacher became the father or my mother. And my mother was a very devoted mother. I don't want to get into too much of that, but I do talk about it because I think it's important to realize that things start early in our lives. We don't know what goes on or what happened or why he left. I was never told. But it had such an impact on me, and that other piano, the little white piano, that had been given to me when my parents were together. So the piano became almost, I use a more technical term, a transitional object for me, something to hold on to when mother and or father weren't there. And that evolved into the career that I have today over time. But I speak now for other musicians that you cannot begin a music career, even though you don't know you're beginning it, unless you start in childhood. And because of the situation I had, I persisted and wanted to become a performing concert pianist. Those were the times when Leonard Bernstein was having his young people's concerts on TV. And of course, I fell in love with him and the music and the way he talked about it and the way he took it out to people and audiences. And I just persisted with piano lessons, with playing little concerts and recitals, and having anxiety. I remember having anxiety as a child, and I played, and I developed the talent that I had. I mean, I can't deny that I had talent, but it was never easy to play in front of people. In high school, I was asked to play. I was the most talented in high school. You accumulate a lot of pressure also from others and from expectations and from maybe feeling inside my own mind that I wanted the love from the audience, from my piano teachers. First one was not very good, aside from not listening, which is a big thing, to tune in to what your students are saying, what your patients are saying.
You're speaking of the emotional meaning of music and then making meaning of that through psychoanalysis, making yourself aware of and a greater understanding of, but also the emotional meaning of pursuing psychoanalysis as a discipline and the overlap of that with music for you.
The absolute overlap of that. But if you had asked me, because I wanted to go into music, eventually I wanted to go to Juilliard. When I was accepted there, my dream came true because I was going to be a concert pianist. I was going to be a Juilliard graduate, and I was. I have 2 degrees from there. And no one at Juilliard, no one really talked about stage fright anyway. No one really talked about performance anxiety. It was practice harder or you're okay. My piano teacher at Juilliard, I would talk to him and ask, what can I do about this? And he would say, and he meant so well. He was wonderful. I love him. He was a father substitute to me for a while. He would say, I'm not worried about you, so you shouldn't be worried about yourself. Well, that is a wonderful support, but it's also, oh my God, I can't let him down either. Who did I let down? I grew up with a lot of these kind of fantasies that I couldn't articulate until I discovered much later, after Juilliard. And I do want to mention a really interesting experience, which I think led me to psychoanalysis. It was after Juilliard, and I graduated. And I did well there. I played, but it was not without the emotional angst. It was not without going on stage with, how is this going to be? Is the audience going to see me like on that tape and feel embarrassed and guilty? And what's wrong with me that I can practice it and play it in the practice room but put me on. But I did well, but the emotional toll was great.
So one of the, links, I'll say, between your music career and becoming a psychoanalyst, and the link between working with people who are musicians
and others.
And others.
I mean, what I'm saying applies to
anything where there's a performance, right?
Anything.
Of sorts.
Anything. All kinds of professions, or just social anxiety, or raising your hand in class and feeling, am I stupid because I'm, and then somebody else asks the question and the teacher said, oh, that was a really good question. And you think, why didn't I ask it? Because I had the same, it's an inhibition.
So it is this, it's hard to believe that there weren't plenty of other, and there aren't constantly plenty of other musicians and other sorts of artists, or as you said, day-to-day people who are needing to perform in some way in front of someone that don't struggle with this anxiety or self-criticism, which is part of social anxiety, self-judgment. So how do you approach that then psychoanalytically?
Well, it depends on the person. If we're talking about any patient, really, they call you and they have symptoms of something. They're complaining about something that's bothering them. I'll stick with musicians, but I hope people who are listening to this will translate this into whatever they do, because this kind of anxiety about being approved and being loved and being wanted and being promoted, two big things, being rejected and competitive, particularly in the music profession. But when a musician calls me and wants to see me, typically they're worried about having a memory slip. Their memory will fail them in public, or their technique will fail. They will play sloppy. They'll play the wrong keys. They'll get in the wrong key. And what I'll help them to do is to gradually, we put this in the context of, I've had people say, I think I'm crazy. I can't think. And so I have to, in the initial stages, deal with the performance anxiety, performing before me and wanting to be perfect and competitive with me, and all of the issues we see in analysis. And I want to backtrack a minute here, because starting as a young child, I say music starts in the nursery when you have communication, not words, but communication between the parents and the child, the responsiveness, the receptiveness. The child feels there's some control. The parent will be back. The parent will be in tune again. But when children discover music, even if it's with toys, they go through developmental stages, and I'm getting around your question, I think, with a roundabout answer, but it's complicated. And there are many layers, and I help people see from symptom to layering and to understanding eventually. I mean, this is a process, because this doesn't come on overnight, obviously. When they're 20s, 30s, whatever age they come in, you've had early experiences that you fold in to your current experiences, and you have emotions about them. And so I try and help people understand that there's a part of your mind that never forgets you. And it holds on to a lot of things that become skeletons in your closet. I also sometimes use, and this is with non-musicians also, music that will come into my mind that I will share with them when they're talking about love that they didn't get, or they tried so hard, or they are afraid people won't like them. A song may come into my mind, and what comes into my mind right now is I'll use a Beatles song, Money Don't Buy Me Love. Thinking of money, because in the music profession, money is an issue that is low on the totem pole in terms of earning sufficient income. And with the pandemic, no income.
Right.
We try and look at how the symptom gets transformed in the way you're talking about it and the way you're thinking about yourself. And for example, with the money, many musicians will play for low or no fees, because it's the love, it's the being wanted, it's the being invited. But it doesn't pay the bills. It's what we call psychic, and I call psychic income, a term I got from The Economist, that you do it because you feel somebody wants you to play. And as we talk about money, we talk about the psychoanalytic meaning of money. I don't say this is the psychoanalytic meaning and yours is wrong. You need an income. And they get second and third jobs often to do that. But what does money mean? And as an example, is yourself, are you worth it? Are you worth it to ask a fee? Are you worth it to say, I need X, Y, and Z? Because love doesn't pay your bills, but it makes you feel good. And so this is so much about these feelings that almost like you too much and tell you, or they don't like you, and they tell you you're not good enough. And that's why it's not happening. So we work
So
on
it can be it's the
self-esteem.
interpretation, the internal interpretation.
The internal, and to try and internalize what often is the audience won't like me. The audience will walk out on me. I won't get a good review.
And it will mean all kinds of things. It will mean
Right.
everything from how valued am I psychically, as you said, or
Money, yeah.
or can I survive, or will I be deprived, or will I be
Yes.
beyond just rejected or judged?
Oh, it's the whole person.
Right.
And one thing that I think does help people earlier on than getting into some of the interpretive things is that you take your whole person onto the stage. You just don't take you as the musician who's playing this concert, but you take everything you are. It's your identity. It's your
Yes.
personality. It just becomes part of who you are. Like you're speaking, I'm not really thinking, I'm talking. I'm thinking because it's part of me, and this is what I'm saying. But it is so much a part of you, and we have to understand what's going on in your mind that is keeping you from feeling good about what's good about you, not what's bad about you. I remember a situation with someone, and I am not identifying anybody because it is general, but often you will see someone with physical pain when they think they're injured, and they will go to all kinds of MDs to get a diagnosis and a cure. Because musicians, everybody, they'll say, oh, this is nice, but what do I do? and some of them will take it and do some acting and acting out and go to get, and they should if they feel they have some medical problem. But I emphasize with them, let's also look at what's going on inside your mind. You're not crazy. Your mind is working and telling you something. Let's try and understand what's going on internally. And when they come back with no physical diagnosis, that in a way is supportive to getting inside of the mind. And with one person, it turned out to be an anger that she was afraid of. And she was afraid of acting out the anger and actually injuring me. And so she had to be the injured one and get fixed.
So there can be different meanings, different
It depends on, then we
performance
try and
anxiety.
understand some of the things that went on in the childhood, her childhood in particular, and trying to add things together that start to, oh yeah, that makes sense. I never thought of that before. Doesn't mean that's the cure, but it means we're at a new level of something we can work at together.
Now, there is something unique about music and its effect on the brain, the mind. Emotionally, as we're alluding to earlier, you have associations to different music at different times because of the ability of music to emotionally touch us in various ways.
Yeah.
So can you speak to that, your experience with music, whether it's playing it or other people's experience of listening to music and the effect on the mind that you understand as a psychoanalyst?
Yes. Music is oral, A-U-R-A-L. Words are O-R-A-L, oral. Freud called, psychoanalysis, the dreams, the road to the unconscious. I call it the oral road to the unconscious because you get representations and you talk about it. Music, I feel, without going into too much about this because we're time limited, I could talk forever, and it's in my book, Melodies of the Mind. That is what it's about. My curiosity about it, what is about music orally, without words, that affects us so deeply, what gets into the mind and affects us so deeply. And that's where I started to see connections between music and psychoanalysis. But one is without words and gets to the affect, the emotions, and the non-representational, which is getting a little technical, or the pre-verbal part of who we are, stimulates feelings in the brain, which I think the neuropsychologists are starting to find. It's in this area or this area. The thing that I would love to see happen, I'd love to be involved if I have a long enough life to do everything I want to do after career changing. I didn't change careers. I blended careers. I have not left anything behind. I just don't play concerts now like I used to. But they can show you on complicated medical equipment, on MRIs, where in the brain is activated. But they cannot, to my knowledge, explain why. What is it that activated? And what about music that brings on these responses in the MRI equipment? I was very interested when I was at Juilliard, and this is part of my history again. My mother died when I was 21, and the year I got my master's degree. And after I went back to school, because I had to be home and miss a lot of school at that point, I got almost, I'd say, addicted or in love with Leonard Bernstein's Age of Anxiety composition. And I played it over and over and over on recording. And it was very soothing to me. It was very helpful to me. I'm not sure still why that, the Age of Anxiety, I'm dealing with anxieties, but why that piece. It was jazzy. It was, I loved it. Another piece that I love is my Desert Island piece, I think, is the Rachmaninoff Third Piano Concerto. And I'm talking classical music because I was trained classically, but I'm not saying it has to be classical music for anybody who's listening. Mm-hmm. And I know, and I may be circumventing your question a little bit, but I'm going to come back, is that when we were in the beginning and even the middle of the pandemic, and we had town hall meetings at the American on Zoom, and someone asked, what is helping you during this time? And music. And then people started talking about musical things that they had heard or that started to be Zoomed online. And there's something about music. I find it with patients. Often they will use musical analogies, or some patients will sing songs, or I will have music come to my mind that I will use interpretively or just quietly to think about why am I thinking of this music or this song at
There's a strong
this particular time.
As you are saying in basically your origin story, between music and memory, right? Events that happen with essentially a musical accompaniment, and it's embedding in your memory in a certain kind of way. And we know, for example, people with dementia have the ability to remember, to play, to move to music and remember music when they can't remember much else.
That's right.
So that it is stored in some way that is emotionally evocative and has in very deep brain structure.
Very deep. You talk about deep. Music strikes you in your brain, I say in your heart, often where words can't access, or it can evoke or stimulate words to then express. It can bring up the more verbal ideation. So the oral goes very, very deep into us.
We know it can affect mood, even on the simplest level of, as you said, a piece that you can feel comforting, or a piece that can boost your mood or make you sad.
Make you sad, can make you excited, can be used for political causes. Music can be, it's very versatile for feeling and for communicating with others. And one thing that I have come upon, and in Melodies of the Mind, what I did was after the first chapter, where I looked at Freud's aversion to music, where he said he could almost not appreciate music, although he liked Bizet's Carmen, he liked several Mozart operas, he liked and envied Wagner. I think Wagner's incest themes were a little too close for comfort with Freud. And I started wondering, is this defensive for Freud, not a dislike of music? And then every other chapter in the book, except the last one, is based on a piece of music itself, trying to look at what overlaps between music and psychoanalysis. In that, just a few examples would be, if a patient comes to see you, they come in with a core conflict. They come in with something they want to solve. A composer starts with a theme, a series of notes, black dots on a page that make sense, and he develops them over the course of a piece. In treatment, we develop the core conflict. through looking at various aspects of the patient's developmental history, losses, significant occasions, defenses, like the audience doesn't like me, or I've got to please the audience, or I'm crazy, or, only crazy people see a shrink. And in music, you have displacements. Melodies get turned upside down. Rhythms get changed. So you have a similar vocabulary that you can relate to that.
So you're saying there's a similarity between the vocabulary of music and the vocabulary of psychoanalysis?
Yes, I think there is. One's oral
Mm-hmm.
and one's oral.
Right.
And I think there is a connection. In terms of evidence, I think they're questions rather than this is what it is. I think there is good enough evidence, not scientific with p-values and things like that. But I think there's good enough evidence in why music affects you. You don't need to know this stuff, but it fascinated me to probe that and to make connections. We probably don't have time, but the first piece that I analyzed musically and psychoanalytically, it's an interesting story, actually. I was the first-year candidate. I was at a party with a bunch of analysts, and Salman Akhtar was the guest of honor. And Salman and I didn't know each other, but we were standing together at the buffet table. If I remember correctly, near the carrots, we were eating carrots. And I said, I knew he wrote a lot. And I said, are you working on anything now? He said, yes, I'm writing an edited edition on Freud and animals, the wolf man, the pack man, little Hans. So I just said to him, are you writing anything about music and animals? And he said, no, that's a good idea. Would you do it? He didn't know me from Adam. And I said, yes. I didn't know what I was going to do. I said, yes. And I wound up writing about Peter and the Wolf. And in Peter and the Wolf, you see the whole developmental experience of Peter leaving grandfather's home, leaving the gate. Grandfather is there, and going out to the world to develop into an older, more sophisticated kind of an adolescent, young adult Peter, meeting the bird, the duck, the wolf, the hunters. And they each have an instrument by the composer Prokofiev who identifies them. You hear the oboe, you know that is, and I'm forgetting what it is. I think it's the cat. I may not be right on that. The flute is the bird. But I heard them also as aspects of Peter because these animals were both afraid but very brave. And Peter took on both aspects, and that was his theme. And Prokofiev starts the whole piece of music with a very simple string quartet with Peter's theme. The core conflict that starts an analysis where you get variations on that theme. Here we get variations on Peter's theme. If we had music here, I would play it for you. And then Peter takes in the characteristics of every one of these instruments. He is the wolf. He has aggression, but he settles it. He doesn't kill the wolf. He takes him to the zoo. And all of these animals, the bird goes to the tree, is frightened, but then comes down and helps Peter pull the cord to pull up the wolf to catch him. That's part of Peter. But that's also the story of the music that you don't have to know any kind of analytic internalization and projection. And at the very end of this composition, Prokofiev puts Peter's theme back again, just like the beginning, but with a full orchestra playing it. Peter is grown. He's grown from a 4-person string quartet to an orchestra. It's mind-boggling.
So the psychoanalytic interpretation of this composition.
But it's how the music and the story go together.
Do you think that we're able to psychoanalytically understand something about the mind of a composer from their pieces?
I've thought about that. I certainly do read biographies of these composers, and I think I could say something about Prokofiev's biography and the Russian censorship of composers, but he came back to the Soviet Union and he wrote this piece where Peter grew up and freed himself. I feel uncomfortable, and I think other people are more comfortable talking about the composer, and it's certainly a part of this whole picture, just like a parent or just significant person. But I chose to look at the music itself, because I was fascinated about what is it about the music. But I do think the composer...
It's a creative output, right? It's their creative output.
I'm uncomfortable saying anything too confidently when I can't talk to the person.
Understood.
But I do think you can make some insinuations about it. And about the audience too. I
Yes.
mean, there is
Their
a
reaction to their
there
reaction.
is a reaction, just like a patient-therapist or a parent-child. There is a connection between the relationship between the parent and the child. I tell often, I will talk with my music patients, how the audience, I said, all of those people out there, they're your parents. They said, oh yeah, they don't want to do anything to alienate them, they think, by not playing well. We get back to the stage fright.
Yeah.
And then one of the things with parents, I also find that contributes to stage fright. It's very complicated. It is, but it isn't when it's... This is analysis. You start to fit these pieces together that seem overwhelming, and you don't know what to do, so you get anxiety about it. When you understand what's going on emotionally inside of you, not they don't like you, but what is it about me that's not more confident about? I'm ready to go. Of course, you have to practice. That's given. But that I'm ready to go with this stuff. It's part of who I am. Just like I'm talking, I'm not thinking about every word. Am I going to...
It is interesting that so many composers who, really, really successful composers struggled with the symptoms. I mean, it was symptoms of anxiety, but symptoms of mood,
repression,
deep depressions,
loss,
some of them early trauma.
Yeah.
And that there is something for them therapeutic about producing or externalizing their...
in sound.
Yes, in sound.
As Mozart said, I quoted him in Counteracting Freud, and I can't remember verbatim the quote, but talked about, I cannot paint because I'm not a painter. I cannot write because I'm not a writer. I cannot dance because I'm a dancer, but I can make music because I am a musician. And it's I am a musician that is so deeply felt, and that's how the composer expresses what they feel inside.
And it is a way of touching and interacting with others who will then take in this creation of theirs and have their own emotional response.
That's important, what you just said. The listener takes it in, absorbs it, and makes it into what they need to do, maybe even having insights that analysis is a counterpart to, but it happens through music. I don't know how many people listening. I have a lot of times just listened to music and, oh, I never thought of that before. Or this reminds me. And it can be different. It's not that I get the answer. It's wonderful because you get many ways to think about something that was just really invading your life in a negative way when you're so anxious and you feel your world, and it is your world, because music starts so young and continues and develops, and you get good and you want to be professional and you go through the training, and I'm speaking of myself, and then you don't know what do you do with it, which gets into the other part of what I am very interested in, is how to take it out to the public.
So can you speak a little bit about how you have done that?
Oh, a lot of ways. And I wish I'd do it. I'd like to do it more ways, but I've spoken to musicians groups, large, small. In here, I've spoken in Europe. I've spoken in Russia. Actually, I was told by a music teacher, this was a translated talk. I said a few words, then they translated, and it was hard to concentrate doing that. But one of the teachers over there said to me, well, we make it so hard in their lessons that it's easy when they go on stage. So
that was their solution.
Well, that was her solution anyway.
She doesn't understand much about performance anxiety.
Yeah, and
you try to bring this information.
I tried to share it.
Yeah,
I do try and bring it in, but I think now, always, I've been doing this. And you did a wonderful seminar yesterday on taking things to the public, and should we or shouldn't we as analysts. I've been doing it because I felt so strong about it for a long time, and meeting with musicians, but I've met with other groups of people too, who I've met with real estate agents who have to talk to people and sell something and have them like them, or like the house, the extension of who they are buying this house. I mean, I think life is just psychological. So I have,
Public speaking is one of the number one fears and phobias that people might experience, and public speaking is an important part of many careers.
it is. I see people who, some executives, or just speaking to your boss, or speaking in a school board situation, or speaking up in a store, returning something that you don't want to keep, or raising your hand in class to ask a question and you don't do it.
So you try,
It's
when you
everywhere.
talk to groups, you try to educate them that
Yes.
understanding
Mm-hmm.
all of the meanings around what might cause them to experience this momentary freeze or discomfort or terrible feeling,
Mm-hmm.
that it could be varied and that it could have a lot to do with something that has occurred earlier in life,
Mm-hmm.
and that it is likely not conscious to them.
Mm-hmm. Out of
And
their awareness,
by
yeah.
making them, by helping themselves to be aware,
Mm-hmm.
they can alter these symptoms.
It's a great gift that they can give to themselves by expanding their understanding of why are they so anxious about this. And it deals with relationships. I think more and more of this, I've been coining the phrase, especially in my last book, the career choice in music beyond the pandemic, because when we were in the middle of the pandemic, it wasn't just low salaries for musicians. The bottom fell out. There were no salaries. And I think that if professionals of all occupations, analysts, I don't think it dilutes our analytic identity. I think it actually makes us more approachable and offering a way that can be used by people to expand their mental options and then their professional options. And I use the phrase, I say the musician, but the musician as cultural ambassador. I wish I had thought earlier, but Joseph Polisi, the president emeritus of the Juilliard, used the word the artist as citizen. And this book really influenced me. And this was written long before any of this started. He's been taking music off the stage and teaching people at Juilliard. When I was there, it was you won competitions and you became a concert pianist and then you had no job after that. And I didn't want to do that. But you are an ambassador. You go into a community. You go and give a talk. You become human with people. When you see someone play on stage, I mean, it's like, how do they do this? It's a miracle. They're regular people. And if we can have more interaction with regular people and not just stay in a niche of me, them. In analysis, you have people telling you, oh, you know more than I do. Oh, you know less than I do. You get the whole thing. But we're all people. We all struggle with anxiety. I don't mind talking, obviously, about my own. And I share this with them. I have one of my chapters in Career Choices is about the pursuit of perfection and the illusion of celebrity and the disillusionment of celebrity when you find that the celebrity is, we both put on our shoes in the morning. We have to do errands and pay bills and live life. And we're all people. We have different roles, but to go into a community and to interact with people. And what I was getting around to saying is my putting together the applied psychoanalysis with the clinical, because I do both, by understanding that we're all in this together, that having performance anxiety is not the end all and be all, that there are other options, and to take the arts to people, other ways to do it. You can come to terms better with who you are. That doesn't mean you'll never have self-doubts, because I think self-doubt is one thing we try to work on in analysis, is that's a clue. It's not a diagnosis. And that for me to bring the music and the psychoanalyst together, going all the way back to my 4-year-old piano my parents gave me and my 6-year-old piano that only my mother gave me, I will never forget how happy I was when I did write that article on Peter and the Wolf. On one side of my computer, I had psychoanalytic literature, and on the other side of my computer, I had a musical score, and I was bringing them together, and I was in the middle. Now, at one point, I thought maybe I was in the middle, and that's why they divorced. But I think that this was trying to bring it together with the three of us together, or the two of them back together, a fantasy that I probably, undoubtedly, harbored since that childhood abrupt trauma of being left. And then the memory slipped pretty soon afterwards, and the music left my mind. But was I going to be forgotten? Was I going to be erased? And I feel now, I mean, I understand it. I can handle that better as an adult with the understanding. But if I hadn't had this long journey, and a lot of times it's been not a straight line, and it's not something that everybody needs to do or wants to do, but there are people out there who can listen and understand and help them expand their good feelings about themselves, and then you can find things that make you happy instead of trying to deal with this performance anxiety that is unrelenting when it almost gets obsessive.
Well, I appreciate that as a psychoanalyst, you introduce something that I think sometimes is, but often is missed, that music can be an incredible tool, a window into our thoughts and our emotions and our motivations, and in that can be used as a tool to better understand ourselves.
Absolutely.
And now for some Freudian quickies. You sent in your questions for an analyst, and I grabbed an analyst with an answer. How do you know a patient is getting better?
It starts with their ability to really show up in the room, and that they are demonstrating certain parts of the treatment that we have been working on in their everyday life outside the room.
They seem happier. They're doing more of the things that they came to us for. The relationship feels deeper and things are moving. At the same time, there can be ways in which new inhibitions and new anxieties arise or other challenges. So it can be challenging to know.
I might have my ideas of what someone being better is, but if I'm sort of putting that onto them, then it's my definition of how they should be and not how they maybe want to be themselves in the world.
If the patient comes in because they're having difficulty in their relationships and their relationships are now better and working more smoothly, then we would say they're better. If a patient comes in because they have low self-esteem, and as the treatment unfolds and they begin to discover there's more to them than they give themselves credit for, and their self-confidence improves, then you could say they're better because that's what was the problem when they started, and now they're not as insecure as they were when they started.
Better is absolutely relative to the person. Some people are more prone to reality and concreteness and need a curiosity and a loosening of those things in their life and move towards that in a treatment. And others tend towards looseness and need much more concreteness. And when they can move towards that, moving towards what's been neglected is a betterment in the treatment.
To be honest, I don't really ever know. I tend to listen to what's happening, listen to the person that I'm working with, and it's like a mutual decision. So it's not something I think that I really know. I think it's something maybe we decide together at a certain point.
It's very difficult to know in the moment that someone has gotten better. It's usually only upon reflection can we really see it, which is perhaps always the case in analysis.
What do psychoanalysts think about non-traditional relationships like polyamory?
Some psychoanalysts are quite judgmental, and others, I think, hold a lot of space for all different kinds of configurations of relationships and desires.
I think that all psychoanalysts probably have very differing answers to that. I think a lot of people maybe aren't as, curious And so they might come off as more judgmental rather than really trying to understand perhaps experiences that are different from their own. But I think there are more and more people in psychology and psychoanalysis who are really trying to sort of step out of their own box and to learn more about how others are, being in relationships in the world.
I met someone yesterday, for example, who was in a polyamorous relationship, who is a psychoanalyst. And I said, well, God bless, because I have a hard enough time negotiating one partner. I'm not sure how one negotiates two. So it really, I think, varies from person to person.
They see it as a valuable way to constitute new family systems, to form new ways of understanding what it means to have love and mutual care. It's something that I'm even beginning to research with colleagues at the Kinsey Institute on ways of training therapists in dealing with consensual non-monogamy. So it's an old frontier that feels like it's new again.
If you have a question, really any question for a psychoanalyst, send it to apsapodcast@gmail.com, and we will try to feature it in a future Freudian Quickie. For more information about the American Psychoanalytic Association, go to www.apsa.org. Till next time.